It's Tuesday, September 3rd, 2024, and we are 62 days away from the election. Welcome to today's Make It Make Sense mini-episode. I'm Grant Harms. Today on the show, we are talking about the war in Gaza. On Saturday, 6 hostages held by Hamas were found shot to death inside the terror group's tunnels during a raid by the Israeli Defense Forces. Among them was an American hostage taken during the Hamas attack on a music festival on October 7th last year, 23-year-old Hirsch Goldberg Paulin. His parents spoke at the Democratic National Convention just 2 weeks ago.
We know the one thing that can most immediately release pressure and bring calm to the entire region, a deal that brings this diverse group of 109 hostages home and ends the suffering of the innocent civilians in Gaza. The time is now.
Hirsch, if you can hear us, we love you. Stay strong.
That attack left more than 1,200 people dead and sparked an offensive deep into Gaza to root out Hamas. That campaign by Israel has left more than 40,000 Palestinians dead. But over the last several days, hundreds of thousands of people have taken to the streets of Israel's largest city, Tel Aviv, to protest against the country's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The protesters blamed Netanyahu for the death of the hostages for not doing enough to reach a ceasefire agreement and a hostage release. So as the protests were going on, it also came as the country's largest workers' union went on a general strike because of those 6 hostages who were found dead, and that strike nearly shut down Israel's economy, and they did manage to shut down Tel Aviv airport for roughly 2 hours. Now, as they were on strike, many private businesses also reportedly closed out of solidarity. The union said the strike was necessary to put pressure on Netanyahu, but it was ended on Monday afternoon by court order. And if you haven't been watching this play out, the U.S., Israel, and Hamas negotiators have been meeting for months now, on and off, to try to find some sort of a stable deal to end the fighting and return the hostages, but so far, nothing has worked. Then, on Sunday, the Washington Post reported that negotiators for the U.S., who have been working with the nations of Egypt and Qatar to help craft this deal, said that they were nearing a final proposal calling it a take-it-or-leave-it option for Israel, and they're expected to present that to both sides in the coming weeks here. And then on the heels of that, on Monday, President Biden was asked if Netanyahu was doing enough to help reach a deal, and Biden gave a one-word answer: no. Now, Biden and Netanyahu have a strained relationship at best. Back in February, reports and sources inside the White House said that after months of trying to get Netanyahu to back off of his total annihilation of Hamas strategy, Biden called him an asshole at least 3 different times, and Netanyahu has tried to undercut Biden and U.S. peace efforts by claiming the U.S. has held up weapons deliveries on at least one occasion. Which wasn't true, but it was meant to make things difficult for Biden and Democrats politically here in the U.S., but we'll get to more of that in a minute because it is kind of why I'm talking about this war in this podcast. So after Biden said Netanyahu wasn't doing enough, Monday night Netanyahu addressed the Israeli people, including the protesters, saying the tunnels under specifically the Egyptian border with Gaza were his now focus. He also apologized to the families of those 6 hostages. Now, those tunnels are where those 6 hostages were killed, and it's a shifting goalpost for Netanyahu in a way. He did not, however, shift on his stance that the war would continue until Hamas was wiped out. In return, Hamas said on Monday night if there was no ceasefire, that would mean that captives would return in coffins. The thing is, just a few weeks ago, U.S. military senior officials said they believed that Israel's bombing and fighting campaign in Gaza had reached the end of the line, saying the damage to Gaza and the loss of civilian life would only increase as the IDF's ability to actually root out Hamas would only get worse. The bombing campaign in particular has been the focus of humanitarian organizations and the United Nations because multiple hospitals and schools have been bombed and aid workers were attacked and in some cases killed. Critics of Netanyahu have also gone so far as to say that he's using the October 7th attack to cover for a genocide of the Palestinian people, while others have said he's attempting to prolong his 3 criminal trials. Netanyahu is facing 3 different trials for corruption. He's expected to take the stand in December, but that could change if the fighting continues that long. Supporters of Netanyahu, on the other hand, and by the way, this is also the official U.S. position, is that Netanyahu is doing what he can to ensure that Israel is safe and has a right to defend itself from future attacks from extremist groups like Hamas. Whether the war in Gaza continues is also a major issue for the 2024 election, too. Israel is not only America's most important ally in the Middle East, it's the center of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam for many Americans, and questions about how they would handle it as president are central to testing Harris and Trump. Harris has gone out of her way to support Israel's right to defense multiple times, including in her acceptance speech, but she has also tried to extend an olive branch to the pro-Palestinian contingency of the Democratic Party, which so far has not really worked. In fact, the uncommitted movement, which is the pro-Palestinian movement in the Democratic Party, which voted uncommitted in the primary instead of voting for Biden, and I've talked about them before on the podcast and the Make It Make Sense Substack, has become a growing rock in the shoe of the Harris-Walz campaign. Now, Joe Biden has been trying to give his VP a boost by including her in photos and statements about how the administration is working to find a peaceful solution as soon as possible, but Harris will need to do a lot of work to walk the tightrope that is making the base of the party happy while also projecting that she would be a strong commander-in-chief and head of U.S. diplomacy. Trump, on the other hand, has a much easier path with this. He can and has thrown his full support behind Netanyahu and his at-any-cost against Hamas campaign. Netanyahu and Trump also have a very good relationship. They got along while Trump was in office. Netanyahu is a very conservative leader, so he was already going to be a little friendlier to Trump, but the two often have seen eye to eye on most things, and so much so that Trump even moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem and recognized that city as the country's capital. Back in July, when Netanyahu was in the U.S. to speak to Congress, a rare honor, he went down to Florida as well to meet with Trump at Mar-a-Lago, which was interesting because Trump wasn't the sitting president, so it was just sort of an interesting, out-of-his-way political meeting. Now, that could also have been a dig at the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, who met with the leader of the opposition party in Israel while he was over there, ostensibly to meet with Netanyahu and talk about a peace deal between Israel and Hamas. So it could have been a little tit for tat there from Netanyahu, too. But then back in August, just after the RNC, Netanyahu and Trump got on a phone call together. And according to the outlet Axios, which reported this first, a source close to Trump said the two discussed the war in Gaza and freeing the hostages. Netanyahu's office is denying those reports. Trump has said in the past that the hostages should be freed as soon as possible, but said the situation overall is very tough. And there are some worries here that Netanyahu is somehow slow-walking negotiations at either the request of Trump or on his own to help Trump's re-election campaign, because Trump would be a much friendlier president than Harris to Israel. Or more just a much friendlier president to Netanyahu's own personal goals. And those kinds of worries conjure up ideas about the Iran hostage crisis in 1980, which the New York Times was able to confirm back in 2019 that the Reagan administration had worked to undermine U.S. negotiation efforts to hurt then-President Jimmy Carter's re-election efforts, and Reagan won that election in a landslide. The hostages in that were released the same day Reagan was inaugurated, so it's not beyond the pale to worry about this kind of a thing happening. I do want to say, though, there has been no credible evidence to support that line of thinking, but it is the fear that hostages and the lives of thousands of Palestinians, not to mention the lives of IDF soldiers, are being used as political pawns rather than people. And Trump might not even need that kind of help on this issue either. A recent ABC News poll found that 40% of Americans said Trump would do a better job on handling the war in Gaza compared to 33% who said that of Harris. Now, neither of those are stellar numbers, but it's still a significant gap in favor of Trump, especially on an issue in which most Americans don't really know all that much about. Finally here, U.S. negotiators say they think their ultimatum approach on the current talks will force Israel into a deal, but whether that's true or just diplomatic posturing is something that we won't know for a few weeks. Okay, that is it for today's MIMS Mini. Please rate and review the show on whatever podcast app you're listening on. It really helps this thing reach more people. Also, like and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. If you're not, head over there and like and subscribe anyway. It will also help spread the show. And you can check out our fun new graphics. Please also check out the Make It Make Sense Substack. I've got some big things happening there at the end of the week, so you're not going to want to miss out on that either. And then finally, please share this on social media. It's MIMS News Pod, MIMS News Pod. It's all one word on every platform. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Herms, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.